with the, oops.
There's Councillor Stephen Turner, looking quite wise, actually.
Well, there's His Worship, our mayor, looking very wise as well, and kind of like, I don't know, imposing from this up angle thing.
It's all angle, you know.
That's right. It's all on the angle.
The guy should be 6'3".
And,
By the way, if I did
and we
have
are
overhead,
streaming. We are streaming.
we are streaming. See, Councillor Turner.
Knew that was coming.
Thank you, Clerk.
All right, we have quorum, and it's 1 minute after 4 o'clock, so I'll call the meeting to order. And I will begin by saying that the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings, and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact pec@london.ca. With that, I will look to committee for disclosure. Oh, sorry, the clerk is calling my name.
Sorry, Madam Chair, we have someone that has joined us with an iPhone, and we have no idea who that individual is. So if they could please identify themselves so we can determine whether they should be let in, that would be helpful. Thank you.
So if you are in the waiting room on an iPhone, can you please just let us know who you are?
They're in the waiting room. I don't think they can hear us at all.
We've figured out who it is. Thank you.
I was told they could hear us, but thank you, Councillor Turner, and now we know who it is, so we can go ahead. Now I will ask for disclosures of conflict. Any from the members of committee that are here? I am not seeing any. So I'll move to the consent items, items 2.1 through 2.7. Would anybody like any matter pulled? Councillor Turner.
I don't need it pulled necessarily, but I'm going to pull it just in case the answer is not great. It's for 2.4, if I could.
Thank you. 2.4 is pulled. Anybody else? Nope. So what I need is a motion for the remaining consent items. That's all consent items except for 2.4. Moved by the mayor, seconded by Councillor Turner. Any comments on those items? I see no comments or questions or concerns, so I will call the vote. And I will call by name. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0.
Okay, so I'll go to item 2.4. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps through you to staff, so the holding provision was with respect to the hydrogeological study and the groundwater surveys, and it sounds like those have been met and are appropriate. My question is just with respect to the post-development conditions. What exactly are the conditions, and what are the remedies for any impacts that might be identified through that monitoring post-development? So how long will the monitoring last, and should issues be identified, how do they get rectified?
I'll go to staff for that.
Perhaps Mr. Pompili could provide a response to that one through you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Feldberg. Mr. Pompili.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Those matters would have been identified in the Hydro-G that was provided, and it should be reflected in the development agreement for that site. So once development begins and the site is disturbed, then those remedies would be addressed through that development agreement. I don't have those details, those specific details at this moment, but I can certainly take steps to have them for you before council meets next week.
Councillor?
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. I didn't see any of the parts in the development agreement that identified those or in the report. If they could be identified before council, I'd appreciate that. But I think what I'm looking for is just assurances that the those matters have been identified to appropriate strength, and that there is appropriate measures and resolution for the city should issues be identified through that monitoring later on.
Okay, so we'll get those to you and to council before the council meeting. Any other comments or questions on item 2.4? No, seeing none. Do I have a motion? So Counselor Hopkins, I believe, is moving the staff recommendation. Do I have a second? The mayor is seconding that, and I'll call the vote. Counselor Hopkins.
Yes.
Counselor Turner.
Yes.
Counselor Kayabaga. Oh, you're muted, Counselor.
Yes.
Thank you. Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
That brings us to the scheduled items, and 3.1 is our first public participation meeting. It is an application at 1176, 1200, and 1230 Hyde Park Road, and a portion of 1150 Gainsborough Road. I will look for a motion to open the public participation meeting, moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Kayabaga. I'll call that vote. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Okay, so I'll go to staff for a brief introduction of this item.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a brief introduction then. I'll just give a little background on the site as it pertains to it. In 2018, there was an official plan amendment for the site for a special area policy. This policy identified how the subject lands would develop through a future plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment. The vision of this was for a low to mid-rise mixed-use residential neighborhood. It identified detailed policies and regulations which restricted heights and densities across the site and permitted some specific residential uses. There were height permissions of 6 stories through bonusing that could be achieved within 100 meters of Hyde Park Road through bonusing. And then the heights would taper down to 4 stories in the middle of the site and 3 stories as you moved west. There's also a maximum density of 75 units per hectare over the entire site. So the total land area could be used in any future development for density. In regards to the application, as you mentioned, it's for a draft plan of subdivision and a zoning bylaw amendment. This will create 2 residential blocks and 2 mixed-use residential blocks. The development identifies low to mid-rise apartments internal to the site, as well as mixed-use buildings along Hyde Park Road, seeking to achieve that maximum height of 6 stories through bonusing. There's also a multi-use pathway to be provided along the southerly edge and westerly edge of the property, connecting north to the London Hyde Park Rotary Link. In terms of recommendation, staff is supportive of the proposed rezoning draft plan and the draft plan of subdivision. We feel it implements the specific policies of the official plan as well as the policies of London plan. The heights proposed through zoning are in keeping with the policies. We feel the bonusing criteria identified is appropriate to permit the increase in height from 4 to 6 stories. And the densities proposed on all 4 blocks will result in a total density of less than 75 units per hectare, again, in keeping with that special policy. And that's all I have for an overview. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Corby. Are there any technical questions? Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Through you to Mr. Corby. Thanks for the report. The report mentions a couple times about affordable housing, speaks to the London Plan components and general policies. In this, it describes that this allows for opportunities for affordable housing due to various unit sizes. But is there anything that compels that unit type to meet the actual definition of affordable housing rather than just various levels of affordability?
Mr. Corby.
Through you, Madam Chair, there's nothing to compel them to meet the definition of affordable housing, as it is just large blocks in the plan of subdivision. It's a little more difficult to ensure we receive affordable housing as we do through bonusing through site-specific amendments. The policies are obviously in the official plan when they come through site plan that we will seek to achieve these affordable housing goals. We also did encourage them to speak to HGC through this process, but nothing came of that.
Councillor Turner.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. So would we typically leave this to site plan to get to that level in terms of the zoning application? or would this not be something that that's considered at the time of the zoning bylaw and the official plan amendments? It speaks to the official plan policies, but doesn't realize the official plan policy, and so that's my concern here.
Mr. Corby?
Through you, Madam Chair, it's difficult through the plan to subdivision process to have a mechanism, I guess, to tie them down to affordable housing outside of the bonus zone. So that's the difficulty we face here. And in this reference, they're not actually achieving higher densities than what's permitted. They are increasing the 2 stories in height through the bonus zone. So that could have been somewhere where we could have required affordable housing, but we felt the design criteria was substantial enough to achieve the bonusing on the front of that site.
Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, if I could, it's Mr. Yeoman. Thank you very much. I just want to add too, though, that it's important to recognize that there aren't any low density zones that are recommended as part of this subdivision as well. So on the spectrum of affordability, recognizing that it won't be regulated affordability through market rents that are tied to a bonus zone, it is inherently a more affordable development than a number of other developments we've had in this city.
Councillor Turner, any other questions?
No, thanks. I'll leave the rest for comments.
Thank you. Any other technical questions on this application? Seeing none, I will go to the committee rooms to see if the applicant is present, and would the applicant care to make a comment? If you could state your name and then you have 5 minutes to address the committee.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me through the mask. Good afternoon. My name is Hannah Shirtliff, and I'm a planner with Monteith Brown Planning Consultants. And I'm here today with Jay McGuffin, the Vice President and Principal Planner of Monteith Brown, as well as our client Jim Bajuvis of Farhi Holdings. We'd like to thank staff for their work on the report and their work on this project to date. We really appreciate the opportunity to review everything in advance. We agree with staff's recommendation, and we are available to answer any questions that council or members of the public may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now we'll go to the committee rooms to see if there are any members of the public who would like to comment on this application. I'm not seeing any. Oh, Ms. Bundy. No? Okay, great. I see a head shake. So I'm not seeing any members of the public who would like to comment on this, so I will look for a motion to close the PPM. Moved by Councillor Kayabagha, seconded by the mayor, and I'll call the vote. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabagha.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, so I'll go to the committee to see if there is further discussion on this. Councillor Turner, you had mentioned that you wanted to comment. Are you ready to comment now?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I was just trying to organize my thoughts a little bit. My concerns around this are there's a couple sections in here that talk to affordability and specifically reference the official plan policies and goals of the official plan, London plan, and otherwise. And affordable housing has a very, very specific definition. It's not speaking to range of housing affordability. It's affordable housing, which speaks to its reference against the market rate and against the ability of a specific household income, how much of that income is going towards housing costs and shelter. So I'm not happy to see it referenced here without it actually being accomplished in some way. And I recognize that perhaps this may not be the point, or that we might not have a lot of mechanisms to compel it, and that's a challenge for us. But the bonusing is one of those places. Mr. Yeoman, perhaps I could ask you for comment on this, but you you'd identified that the type of housing leads to some level of affordability, but at the outset of this, the bonusing itself is to achieve a high quality mixed use of apartment buildings, which seems to lend towards thinking that it might be on the higher end of the cost spectrum as well. So I'm wondering what mechanisms we do have in order to achieve some level of affordability within this development in the true sense, rather than a range of different price points within it. Perhaps that's through you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, to Mr. Yeoman, I believe.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Through you, Madam Chair. It's a great point the councillor is making, and it is something that we're continuing to work through with the various proponents that come forward with us. The regulatory tools that we have to fulfill the policy direction are somewhat limited. I will note that the province continues to work on its inclusionary zoning framework. We wait with bated breath for further direction and further advancements on that. The Ontario Professional Planners Institute is having its conference next month, and there are a number of sessions regarding this specific matter and these related matters. And your staff will be attending and very eager to hear what some of the ideas and topics are from other communities as well. It is a large development that is being proposed with a large number of units. The bonusing provisions are related to the buildings that front onto Hyde Park, but there are a number of different sizes and formats through the rest of the development. And so the hope is that it will generate a good deal of affordable housing through the development overall. But I do take the councillor's point.
Through Madam Chair, perhaps Mr. Corby, were there discussions with the applicant about achieving some level of affordable housing within the development?
Through you, Madam Chair, as I mentioned at the start of the process, when we were looking at the bonus zone, well, we did encourage them to reach out to HDC to discuss potential affordable housing through the bonus zone. As I mentioned, as a result, nothing did come of that, and we landed on the bonusing criteria that you see in the bylaw.
Through you, Madam Chair. So am I to take that there was no desire then on the part of the applicant to incorporate affordable housing into the development?
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't want to speak on behalf of the applicant, but from what I can gather, there was no desire to pursue the affordable housing.
Madam Chair, would it be appropriate for me to ask the representative for the applicant to that question?
Absolutely, councillor. If the agent for the applicant would like to respond to the councillor's questions.
Hi, good evening. Jay McGuffin, Monteith Brown Planning. Through the chair to Councillor Turner. I don't recall specific direction with regard to affordable housing. As Mr. Corby indicated, this development is following up on the heels of a specific official plan amendment to Section 10 of the 1989 official plan with regard to the structure of the policy framework. The bonusing applies only to those properties that are fronting onto Hyde Park Road, and the bonusing was tied solely to allowing the 6 stories. Any reference to affordability could be identified as attainable housing units rather than affordable or low A affordability versus capital A affordability. And that we're providing for a campus of residential development that will provide for a vast number of varying types of units, varying numbers of bedrooms within units, that will appeal to a varying array of price points, which will inevitably expand the range of affordable housing in the city from the latter effect. So people will be moving to newer developments out of older developments and creating opportunities in older developments at lower price points. This is a measure in land use planning of attaining affordable housing, but is not part of an affordable housing structure. It does not seek to gain any additional bonusing for the provision of affordable housing, and it does not seek any government monies for the provision or subsidy of housing. I hope that addresses the comment and the timeline, as the official plan amendment that was passed for this development was done approximately 2 years ago. And it's taken this amount of time to bring forward the necessary technical studies. And in the passage of that time, or back when that official plan amendment was envisioned, the affordable housing crisis was not upon us. I'm available to answer any more detailed questions, and I also have our client here who could respond to any specific questions about the development should they, any of the members of the committee wish to advise. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGuffin. Councillor Turner, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. McGuffin. I appreciate the answer. That does answer my question. Leaves me with the same concerns, of course. I do get concerned with the trickle-down housing economics, rationalization of freeing up other housing. It does become problematic, especially if not enough housing is built, or if there are other challenges and the housing that is vacated that doesn't change its price point. So in theory, I think it works about as well as Reaganomics. In practice, I haven't seen much evidence that it is that effective, which is why we have official plan policies to try and create some additional stock, either through bonusing or through other provisions. It is challenging, as Mr. Yeoman noted, without our ability to compel, as would be the case with inclusionary zoning. Our hand has been somewhat weakened on that to be focused on primary transit corridors rather than on a citywide policy. So those are my concerns with the application, especially in suburban development. Suburban development really needs to start focusing on mixed density, which this is, I appreciate that, and mixed price point with affordability and affordable housing by definition built into it. To have these, the price points that in suburban development are typically unattainable to those who would access affordable housing. And it creates a very homogeneous monoculture within the subdivision. And certainly it doesn't help us to encourage to be able to do the expansion of transit, for example, to service the neighborhoods. Nonetheless, this is a long standing property that has not yet been developed. It looks like it's a continuous development, so it fills in a bit of a gap within the development footprint of the city. And I do appreciate the mid-rise aspect of it. I think that's very helpful too. It's not all single families, for example. So there are some aspects that I like about the application. There's some that still leave me wanting in other areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kayabaga.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I just have a question for staff. Sorry about that. I just had a question for staff through you, Madam Chair, just to follow up on the question that Councillor Turner was asking. I remember asking this question when I first joined the planning committee, and it was around the initiative that the last council prior to this current council had made on inclusionary zoning. And I'm still wondering why we are 2 years past the last council and we're still not making every application go through some type of inclusionary zoning. And I just wanted to know where that's at and whether we're still going to follow through that plan or not, or if we have taken any other direction. And I feel like I haven't really received an answer on where the inclusionary zoning plan sits at currently. So if someone could tell me where we're at with that, it kind of ties into the questions that Councilor Turner was asking.
I'll go to Mr. Yeoman to answer that.
Through you, Madam Chair, so it is a great question. I'm going to ask Mr. Adama if he could speak further to it. I know it's something we as staff have been eagerly awaiting from the province. There's been a number of proposals that have been made that have shifted over time, but he can provide you with a further elaboration.
Thank you, Mr. Yeoman, and through the chair. Inclusionary zoning has been on our city planning work program to complete the review for quite some time. However, one of the changes that were made in the legislation through Bill 108 were to limit the areas to where inclusionary zoning can apply. So as it stands today, only in areas subject to a community planning permit system or areas that are within a designated protected major transit station area are eligible to have inclusionary zoning applied. So as you saw, I think a couple months ago now, we brought draft policies for your consideration around the identification of designated transit station areas. We anticipate that that amendment to come forward after some engagement happens towards the end of this year. And then that will allow us to complete a review of inclusionary zoning to be conducted by the end of 2021, and hopefully amendments brought forward to you next year.
Thank you. Councillor Kaibaga?
So if I heard that correctly, will we be getting another report sometimes next year?
Through the chair, that's correct. And we had to delay that study because it has to, or it's only allowed now to be implemented in areas that are within a protected major transit station area. So following that amendment, we'll be bringing forward a review of inclusionary zoning to apply within those areas.
So which would not be taking place through you, Madam Chair, anytime before 2021.
Through the chair, that's correct. Our work plan has it, or that review initiating following the major transit station area project and being complete within 2021.
And just the last question through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Adama. Is there any delays that are going to be, is the Bill 108 going to affect inclusionary zoning, or does the delay connect to any of the Bill 108?
Through the chair, yes, it is connected to Bill 108 because prior to that, there was no geographic limitation on where inclusionary zoning could apply. One of the major changes affecting us made by Bill 108 was that geographic restriction, which only allows it to apply within a protected major transit station area. At the time, our official plan didn't include, and the London plan didn't include major transit station areas because those hadn't been added to the Planning Act when the London plan was being written. So the first step to providing for inclusionary zoning is to designate protected major transit station areas, which opens the door for us to consider inclusionary zoning in those areas.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. And thank you, Mr. Adama. Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to follow up on the conversation that we're having here on affordable housing, I appreciate the comments from my colleagues about affordable housing, and in particular, Councillor Turner's concerns around what we are approving here in this recommendation. And I just want to make a comment following, when I first read this, mid-rise development, great opportunities. It's great to see a lot more of these applications coming forward for mid-rise. But when we associate the word affordable housing to different size units, numbers of proposed development, recommendations and zoning for medium density, I automatically assume we are going to be adjusting the costs and the opportunities to allow for different price points. I don't know, this is the first time I've sort of seen this kind of, I guess, specification or applying affordable housing. But I think we have to be really clear and careful when we do talk about affordable housing, understanding how it works. And right now I'm sort of in the dark, and I've been probably in the dark for the past couple of years when it comes to affordable housing. I know a lot of changes are coming down from the provincial government, so that sort of have handcuffed us, but I guess we'll have to go one step at a time, waiting for a bit more direction. And I know that we can somehow do a better job in having that conversation around affordable housing and exactly what it means when we approve recommendations moving forward. I'll just put those comments aside and through you, Madam Chair, just ask a question around the Section 28.
that is being requested by UTRCA, and that a final EIS be prepared as well. And so we will be sort of approving zoning moving forward without all the full information. And I know usually that can be done through site plan, but my question through you, Madam Chair, to staff is this final EIS report and the Section 28 going to be done before the site plan process? I just want to understand the process here that we're going to be following through with this application.
Mr. Corby or Mr. Yeoman? I see Mr. Feldberg has his blue hand up. Go ahead, Mr. Feldberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So from what we've done through this application, we've actually secured a rather what I'd call a large buffer. So the development limit has actually been established as part of this draft plan that we're bringing forward today. The EIS, because we've managed to secure this buffer, I believe it's 30 meters at the edge of the plan. The EIS will actually be somewhat scoped. So we've actually been able to establish where the subdivision and where the site plans are going to be located at this early stage of the development review process. So the Section 28 and the EIS will actually address just what's within those boundaries, and will take into account the buffer limits that we've been able to achieve.
And if I may, just to follow up on that, what about the relocation of the wetland? Is that going to be considered as well through the Section 28? And
thank you. And Madam Chair, I think actually James McKay, our ecologist, might be able to best address that question.
Great. Go ahead, Mr. McKay.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. So the relocation of the wetland, that's the main purpose of finalizing the EIS. Majority of the work has been done on the EIS, including the agreement for the buffers. But this will have to do with the relocation of that wetland habitat into the buffer. It's a narrow strip of wetland habitat that runs along the, I think it's an old rail line that's there. So that will be addressed during the final EIS.
And if I can just ask, when will that be done, the final EIS?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll turn that back over to Mr. Corby. I'm not sure on the exact timeline myself.
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't have the conditions in front of me here, but I believe it's through the design studies phase. I think hopefully Mr. Feldberg can correct me if I'm wrong.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. So through the focus design studies, which occurs prior to the detailed design submission or the engineering drawings. So once we achieve draft approval, we would then be looking for a number of minor reports, well, not necessarily minor, but reports such as the EIS, and they would come in, and then we would review those. Then following the acceptance of those documents and those reports, we would then move forward into the engineering review, and then further down the road we bring in a subdivision agreement which would implement the recommendations of the EIS and the various other reports and study required as part of the draft plan.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Any other comments or questions from the committee? Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. I apologize I missed this during the presentation. How many units in total are planned for the site? Is it going to hit the maximum allowable density of 750 across all the different buildings that are available? I think it's 75 units per hectare on a 10-hectare site, so it's somewhere around the number of 750 that are possible, but is that what's actually planned to be built?
Mr. Corby.
Through you, Madam Chair, when I did the math, they were just shy of the 750 units because they do have the commercial space to account for as well. So they don't reach the exact maximum, but they're pretty close. I want to say they're between 730 and 740 in terms of units, but that does include the commercial units as well.
Thank you. So in terms of comments, I think what I'm taking from some of the comments from my colleagues on the committee is it would probably be helpful if we were a bit clearer about affordable housing when we're talking about it in passing. In the London plan, it means a very specific thing, but it requires you to do calculations, which people don't necessarily have the information for right at their hands. And it requires information from applicants about what they're planning to do. You know, are they going to be ownership units? Are they going to be rental units? What do they think they're going to rent them for? Much of which is out in the future and may not even be known really at this point, like what the precise rents would be. But I think it makes it hard for us to assess, you know, is this actually affordable housing as is contemplated under the London plan or not? And I think that's going to keep coming up. It's come up a number of times at various applications as we're dealing with it. And I think because people use it to mean different things, it's becoming very confusing. And so I think maybe just as a thought for staff to consider is take a look at the London plan definitions, and perhaps we can have some kind of assessment about whether something is or is not affordable housing as defined under the London plan. At the very least, we could have some certainty about that. I do think it's going to be difficult because, you know, in the London plan, you know, the threshold is low to moderate income households, and that is defined as 60%, like the 60th percentile of the income distribution, right? So anything below that is defined as low to moderate. And if the housing cost is 30% of that, then it's going to be affordable housing under the London plan. That's basically what the definitions of the London plan mean in terms of the rental housing. And there's a bit of a different definition for ownership housing, which is, I think, further kind of complicating things. So I just want to flag that. In terms of the actual application, I'm glad to see something with this kind of density coming forward. I'm going to support the application. I think it's good to see this kind of mid-rise, medium density development coming in the city. This is a pretty large site. I'm glad to see that there's going to be so many new residential units in this part of the city. Certainly a lot more dense than many of the other subdivisions I've dealt with at Planning Committee.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Turner.
Sorry, just one more quick one is, I probably missed it in this, but what's the setback from the rail lines?
Mr. Corby.
Through you, Madam Chair, the zoning bylaw requires a 30-meter setback from the rail lines.
And that's what's achieved, or is it more than that?
What's currently proposed for the concept plan is greater than the 30 meters. But again, they're just concept plans. The blocks will come in probably at different times and will likely change through the site plan process.
Okay, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I just raised that because this has been the site of a number of derailments, and rather spectacular ones. So it's worth noting and making sure mitigative measures are there. And sometimes that 30-meter isn't sufficient to provide the protection to the areas.
Okay, anyone else? So I have one quick question for you, Mr. Corby. This is the rezoning application. So I'm just wondering at any point in the future as this moves through the process, can the applicant make do some work with HDC, with the Housing Development Corporation, or in some other way? Can they at some point decide, yeah, they will set aside a certain number of units for true, by definition, affordable housing?
Through you, Madam Chair, if in the future these blocks are sold off, or when they come in for development and someone wants to seek a greater height or density than would be permitted through the zoning, that's when we could entertain the HDC again about getting affordable housing as we know it through our site-specific application. So that would be the next kind of available opportunity to get it in terms of how we've dealt with it before.
Right, that's coming from our end, but could the applicant just initiate on his own to make some of these units affordable.
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't see why they couldn't reach out to the HDC and entertain affordable housing with them on their own.
Wonderful, great. So I'm with the deputy mayor. I think this is, you know, a good application. I think it sounds like a good development and concept. The agents are here. There is a representative from the company here, I'm to understand. So hopefully they have heard all the comments from committee. I too don't like the idea of putting a little blurb about affordable housing in here when there isn't true affordable housing by definition in the development. And I think that just, I don't know if it's providing further incentive or rationale to support this development. We support the application. It seems from the positive comments I've heard from committee, there seems to be some support for this application. So we don't need that, and I agree that it's somewhat misleading, but the applicant has heard a desire here. And I remember speaking with a representative from Fari Holdings at the former city manager's retirement celebration. And I was told during that conversation that there was a greater desire to be more engaged in the community and to even sort of give back from this organization, give back to the community. This is a really, really good way that the development community can give back to London by providing more opportunities for affordable housing, by definition, true affordable housing in the City of London. We know that there's a shortage. And so I'm hopeful that the applicant and the agents for the applicant are hearing the comments from this committee and are taking them to heart. This is the beginning of this process. It's going to take a while for this to be built. There are opportunities to reach out to the Housing Development Corporation and see about putting in some affordable units in there. So those are my comments. Are there any other questions or comments? I'm seeing none. So I need a motion. Mayor Holder moving the staff recommendation and seconded by Councillor Kayabaga. No further comments. I'll call the question. Councillor Hopkins. Oh, yes. Sorry. Hold on one second. One second. So there are some minor housekeeping items as well in this, and so there's a revised bylaw that we will be passing as well. So it's moved by the mayor, seconded by Councillor Kayabaga. Now I'll call the vote. Councillor Hopkins. Yes. Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Ready?
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
That takes us to item 3.2, another public participation meeting for an application at 3557 Colonel Talbot Road. And I will look for a motion to open the PPM, moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Kayabaga. I'll call that vote. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Yes.
Sorry, Councillor Turner.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
On my screen, you were up there alone on your own, and so I went straight to the second row and missed you. Now you've moved, so maybe I won't miss you next time. So I'll go to staff for a brief introduction of this application.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an application for a zoning bylaw amendment for lands municipally addressed as 3557 Colonel Talbot Road. The site has an area of approximately 2 acres and is currently vacant. The site is surrounded by low-density residential uses in the form of single detached dwellings and was previously occupied by a single detached dwelling which was damaged from a fire back in 2016. The applicant is proposing to rezone the site from an urban reserve and open space zone to a residential R5 special provision, open space OS4 special provision, and open space OS5 special provision to facilitate the development of a 21-unit cluster townhouse development. So the subject application was previously brought forward as an information report in May of 2019. Since then, the applicant has made changes to their plan, including reducing the number of units from 28 to 21 units. As a result of further discussions with the UTRCA and the subsequent review of revised studies, a new development limit was applied to the site, which now effectively represents the zone boundary depicted between the residential and the open space zones. So the special provisions proposed for the residential R5 zone include a minimum front yard depth of 2 meters, a minimum rear yard depth of 0.7 meters from the OS4 special provision zone, a minimum south interior side yard depth of 3.1 meters, a maximum density of 51 units per hectare, and a maximum deck encroachment from the OS4 special provision zone of 0 meters. Additional special provisions are being sought for the OS4 special provision zone to include the additional permitted use of 1 accessory structure, as well as regulating a minimum lot area and lot frontage. Lastly, special provisions are requested for the proposed OS5 special provision zone to regulate a minimum lot area. Concerns were raised by nearby property owners due to the loss of privacy as a result of the proposal. To address these concerns, staff are recommending that Site Plan Approval Authority consider enhanced screening or privacy along the northern property line, including boundary landscaping. Staff is therefore satisfied that the recommended amendment is consistent with the provincial policy statement and is in conformity with the enforced policies of the 1989 official plan and the London plan. As such, staff recommend the zoning bylaw amendment be approved. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vivian. Any technical questions? Councillor Turner.
Just really quickly, on the kind of the concept plan, it shows the delineation on 3.2 requested amendment and shows the lands to be zoned open space OS4. Those are rather rectangular lines for typically what's used to delineate a natural hazard. So that rectilinear delineation one that's supported by UTRCA?
Ms. Vivian?
Through you, Madam Chair, through the rezoning process, the UTRCA was involved with this quite closely. And I can get James McKay to speak more directly on how that line came to be. But essentially it was almost the limit of that flood line. And James, please correct me if I'm wrong on that one. But UTRCA has agreed to that OS4 special provision zone boundary line along with that development limit.
Thank you. As Mr. McKay chimes in here, it's just if it's supposed to be a flood limit, water tends to follow a little bit more of a curvilinear pattern rather than straight lines. So that's the only thing that concerns me with this, is that that it might not actually accurately reflect what that potential flood limit might be.
Through you, Madam Chair, just to address that issue. Again, probably the UTRCA is best to answer it since they worked on that floodplain issue. But I can speak to the fact that it is a cut and fill procedure here. So those rectangular lines will represent what the floodplain is in that area based on the works that will be required to address that issue. So it should be satisfactory, and the UTRCA was on board with this overall layout and what's happened here.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other technical questions? Or did you have something to add, Mr. McKay?
Through you, Madam Chair. Nope, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other technical questions. Is the applicant present, and would they like to address the committee? Please just state your name, and you have 5 minutes. Committee room 4 is muted. Oh, there it goes.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, committee members. My name is Matt Campbell. I'm here with Zelenka Preamo, and we have the whole crew here with us today. So myself, I'm the planner on the file from the private consultant side. We have Farhad Nouri with Royal Premier Homes. We have development engineering, and Mike and Carolyn landscape architects that worked on this file. So everyone's here to answer any questions that may come up. Just to back up a little bit, there's been quite a lot of history with this file. We started off on this project way back in 2018. The original proposal has changed quite a bit as a result of the flood lines that were set out as part of the Dingman Creek environmental assessment. So there was some issues with the original plan. As James mentioned, there is a cut fill analysis that was done that has been accepted by the Conservation Authority. And to Councillor Turner's comment, that's why we have that kind of that odd angle in there. You're absolutely right. That's not representative of a natural flood line. That is an engineered solution to this problem here. So that's exactly why you see that. So the proposal is 21 townhouse units arranged perpendicular to Colonel Talbot Road. There is some improvements to Colonel Talbot Road that are going to be required, and we have submitted for site plan approval right now, and we're working through a lot of the technical issues. We worked very well with staff on this application to come to the zone that we're all satisfied with. I understand that there are a number of concerns from the public. We've done our best to address those right off the bat. I'm happy to answer any questions that may arise out of today's meeting. And again, as I mentioned, we have everyone from our development team here that may be able to answer any questions. A couple of things I would like to point out. When we're looking at the zoning for this site, the density kind of jumps out a little bit as 51 units per hectare, and there's some commentary from the public to that effect. I just want to point out that number is a little bit misleading just because of the zone boundaries that we're working with on this site. The density is taken by the zone, the area that is zoned, and not the property. So the density is actually numerically a little bit higher than you would normally expect on this site. But nothing to cause anyone any sort of alarm. It's just the result of where these zone lines are lying. Just another item, there was some comments about stormwater management. We are proposing what's called a bioswale on this site. So stormwater that's coming off of the driveway and parking area would flow to the rear of the site and enter what's called a bioswale. That's a depressed area that has some vegetation coming up into it. So that provides some quality and quantity control for the water before it goes into the Dingman Creek subwatershed. So I think it's a good summary of what we're dealing with here in front of us today. Again, my name is Matt Campbell with Zelenka Priamo. If anyone has any questions, again, we have everyone from the development team here to answer any questions that may come up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, I understand there are members of the public in committee room number 5 that may wish to address the committee. So I'll go to committee room number 5. And if you could come to the microphone and state your name, you will have 5 minutes to address the committee.
Hello, my name is Ian Campbell. I'm at 3637 Colonel Talbot Road, which is the property directly south of the property we're looking at today. I had actually sent some information into Melanie Vivian on March 29th. I'm not sure that that's made its way into the committee's hands or not. I know that was in the middle of a lot of commotion. So I just wanted to address on that the email that I sent with a number of items on it. 3 items that are of specific concern, both to me and I think to some other folks that are here in the room as well. The first one, understanding that there is a fair slope on that land from north to south, moving down into the creek. I couldn't hear, Matt, what you were saying with regard to how you're going to be managing some of the water that hits impervious surfaces, but as it goes down to the creek, it actually passes over about 20 meters of my property. So all well and good, but the plan is that it's going to go off your property into the OR, whatever it was, zone OR4 zone. But then from the OR4 zone, it then has to pass another 20 feet across my property to actually get to the creek. And that is of some concern to me. Second item is that I don't believe anybody has really contemplated any kind of an elevation that takes decks into account. If you put decks on the backs of the north properties, those decks, which I presume would be at least 4 feet in width, would literally look down on the properties that are directly north of this property. There's a number of residents here who actually own houses that actually will back up to this property. And I think certainly some kind of privacy or some kind of a setback to make sure that people sitting on their deck are not staring into people's pools or bedrooms or living rooms is something that everyone should have some level of concern about. The third item, you talked a little bit about the math isn't really right. I have to disagree with that. The math isn't right simply because you have a setback. That doesn't mean that you can't, because you have the OR4 zone, the flood zone, that doesn't mean you can just sort of take that out of the math equation and say the math isn't right. When you look at the bylaws or the city plan, it was not put together by me. It was put together by your predecessors, putting together best practices for the City of London in development. The zone as it currently stands, which is an R5-6, goes all the way from 25 units all the way to 60 units, which is a big, big window. But the nice thing is that your predecessors put some language in there. If you're at 25 units, that is specifically for areas adjoining or adjacent to low density areas, which is what this is, 25. When you go to the other extreme, 61, that is specifically for inner city areas and locations near major activity centers, which this is not. So now you've got 25 to 61. So you would imagine that this proposal is maybe at 25 or 27 or 28. No, it's at 51, which is all the way to the other end of the scale, which is in and around the inner city areas and locations near major activity centers, which this development is not. So frankly, I am shocked that this committee is recommending an approval of this application.
Are there other members of the public in committee room 5? No? Oh. Okay, state your name, sir, and you have 5 minutes.
My name is Ibrahim Samhat. I'm living at 6961 Clayton Walk, just north of the property. And wanted to say that what Ian mentioned represent a bunch of us here in the room that you can't probably see from the camera. So maybe we can raise our hand or agree on that. But there's a bunch of us here, so I just wanted to make that note. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And just so the community knows, we have received emails and correspondence from members of the community on this file. I'll just check one last time with the clerk to see if there are other members of the public who would like to comment. No?
Members of the public in committee room 4.
There are members in committee room 4. Would they like to address the committee? Yeah, okay, great. Come to the microphone, state your name, and you have 5 minutes.
Hi, I'm Heidi Smith, and I am at 3600 Isaac Court. So my property borders on the west side, or this is on the east side of my property. We've had quite a lot of rain lately, and what my husband and I have noticed is the water that runs along a swale along the back of our property and stays away from the cedar hedge, which is about a 40 or 50-year-old cedar hedge that borders between the back of our property and the property to be developed. And we're not experts, but we were concerned about looking at the diagram, and the snow kind of looks like it's being piled right up at the end of their driveways against the cedar hedge, and how that was going to affect that hedge and whether it would survive or whether it would drown from melting snow and water flow there. So that was a big concern of ours. It's about, I don't know how high it is, but without the cedar hedge, we have absolutely no privacy between the back of our property and the property to be built. So just wanted to express our concerns. We're new to the group, and I'm not familiar with the people in room 4. Hello.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Anyone else in committee room 4? Okay,
No other speakers from committee room 4.
thank you. I'm not seeing any speakers from the public coming forward. So I will go to the committee to close the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Turner. I'll call that vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer,
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins,
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga, Councillor Turner,
Yes.
Mayor Holder,
Yes.
and I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, I'll go to Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the community for coming out and expressing their concerns as well. As you can see, we've heard from the community loud and clear a number of their concerns. I would like to just make a couple comments right off the bat. I agree this application has changed from the original application. We've moved from 28 units to 21 units, and we've also changed and reduced the development limit as well, and allowing the zoning of OS4 and OS5 as well. It's also fair to say that this is close to the Digman Creek. The flood mapping has been changed, and I think the applicant has had to make the changes accordingly, and I thank him for that. It's also fair to say this is tributary 12 as well. This is on a tributary, and concerns about water and runoff and spill off should be a concern and are a concern here to the community. So I do want to thank the developer for making those changes and also working with UTRCA. I know there's a lot of work there and a lot of work still to come, getting the approval of Section 28 as well. But there still remains a number of concerns, and in particular, the concerns around the privacy and the landscaping to the north, to the west was mentioned as well. I think you can say enhanced privacy and landscaping will be recommended, but we're also in the tree preservation plan saying the cedar hedge is going to be maintained as well. And then there's a swale, and there's a number of trees that are going to be removed from this property. But can we address some of the trees? I know that can be done through that site plan process. Snow storage, removal, maybe how that's going to work given the sensitivity of this area. It's planned to the north. What are the opportunities to move it around? I think that's all a site plan conversation, and it's really important to me, and I'll ask the committee if they would support a public site plan process as well, given the number of unanswered questions that still remain. But Madam Chair, I am supportive of this recommendation moving forward, but it is still a lot of work to be done, especially the environmental aspect and the conditions that remain on this property need to be addressed, and hope I can get my colleagues to support holding provision as well. Those are my comments.
So it sounds like the councillor would like to add to this, that there be an H5 holding provision placed on this so that we come back for another public meeting during the site plan process to ensure that site plan issues are addressed at that point in time. I did want to, there were a couple of questions that I made note of that I just wanted to ask Ms. Vivian about. One member of the community had asked about runoff from the site onto the neighboring properties. Is that being addressed? There's groundwater runoff heading onto neighboring adjacent properties.
Madam Chair, it's Michael Tomazinski here, and if I could step in and just answer the question. That type of question comes up often at committee, and it's always the balancing between where does the zoning bylaw apply and where does the site plan bylaw apply. Right now, we're just determining whether or not the use of townhouses is appropriate for this site and ensuring that the development envelope is appropriate as well. But some of those more detailed questions, such as stormwater runoff and tree preservation and snow removal, those will be dealt with at the site plan approval stage. They're just beyond the scope of what the zoning bylaw is able to implement at this point. I think it's a valid question. It's just something that will be considered as part of the site plan approval process and not as part of the zoning bylaw amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Tomazinski. So just to reiterate, for members of the public that have these questions, such as tree preservation, privacy around decks was another question that came up, and the runoff, the water runoff onto neighboring properties. This point in the process is whether or not this is seen as a suitable use of this land, but this kind of use, this kind of development on this particular site. And that's what we deal with here at this committee, whether or not to approve that kind of rezoning. And then as it moves through the process and gets to the site plan process, that's when the details of the site itself are addressed, such as the grading of the property and the site and the tree preservation and all of those sorts of things. And so what Councillor Hopkins is proposing is putting an added holding provision on here so that normally it's the staff, city staff that deal with the site planning process. With a holding provision like this H5, it comes back to this committee and the public are given another opportunity to address these very specific site plan issues like tree preservation and water drainage and runoff. So just that little bit of explanation. And Mayor Holder, I see that you had your hand up.
Thanks very much, Chair. So I agree with staff that we have a number of site plan process issues relating to trees and groundwater, and those things will be dealt with at in the site plan process, and I'm sure will be dealt with thoughtfully. And I do want to acknowledge the staff's efforts as they've prepared this. But you know what the site plan process doesn't deal with, frankly, at this stage, is the issue of density. I happen to agree with the resident who identified this development as too dense for the site in terms of its local context. This is challenging for me to support. I think it's too dense. I think a reduction in density would be, in my view, necessary to make this fit in even when it talks about proximity to trees and all the like. Again, I know it went from a higher number of 28 to 21 sites. I think it's too dense. So I'm not going to be supporting this as it is, and I want to share my reasons why. I've got some serious challenges with it.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps for you, Mr. Campbell, the resident raised this as a question or a point of concern, was that the R5 zone does have this provision in it that says density range is from 25 units per hectare, 10 units per acre, designated to accommodate townhousing development adjacent to lower density areas, to 60 units per hectare, 24 units per acre for inner city areas and locations near major activity centers. Perhaps staff could just comment on why the choice at R5 or R5-6 in this at the higher end of the density range provided for in the zoning bylaw here, and why it's not contemplated to be adjacent to a low density area, as is argued by the resident.
I'll go to either Ms. Vivian or Mr. Tomazinski.
Through you, Madam Chair, perhaps I'll chime in first. This is, well, we first evaluate the policy, and then then we evaluate whether or not the appropriate or the requested zone is appropriate for the site. So this is a property in the SWAP secondary plan that is actually fairly permissive. It's a medium density residential. So there's in fact a minimum density here of 30 units per hectare that we have to achieve and a maximum of 75. So the density of 51 units per hectare is pretty much in the middle of that. So the applicant actually applied for the zoning bylaw amendment, and it is something that perhaps we should we choose, or should the applicant have decided a different zone was more appropriate, we could have looked at that as well. It's wide ranging, and it just seemed to be the most appropriate given the uses that are permitted in this zone. But with that small change for the increased density, but certainly an R7 zone could have been applied for, which allows by policy even more density. But we felt by applying this zone, notwithstanding the restriction that it be near a regional hub or essentially an activity node, notwithstanding that, it's an appropriate zone to limit the intensity to this and also to the range of uses. But as I mentioned, a more intensive zone could have been applied and could have been deemed to be consistent with policy. So we thought that this was fairly conservative to protect the neighborhood from any more density. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to speak again too, because I think it's important that we understand our policies, and in particular SWAP, and that's something that looking at this, understanding the area, the intensity, and the neighborhood around, I would like to, maybe just following up on Councillor Turner's question, ask what could be permissible in this area. I know we are looking at right now 51 units per hectare, sort of looking at the middle range here, going over 1 unit. But for now, I'd just like to ask that question: what is permissible in this area?
Through you, Madam Chair, the going over by 1 unit, that's just a zoning tool. But again, I just want to be clear about that. In terms of policy, it's smack dab in the middle of the permissions. So uses such as low-rise apartment buildings could be contemplated here. The policies require a minimum of 2 stories and a maximum of 4 stories. So this is certainly the low end of the height range. And as previously mentioned, it's in the mid-range of the density permissions. But anywhere from low-rise apartment buildings to stacked townhouses to townhouses could also be contemplated on this site.
Any other comments or questions from committee? Okay. Were you putting your hand up, Mr. Mayor? Oh.
Yes, I was. Thanks. So I just heard staff again, and I appreciate the efforts that they've gone to try to make this work. But it strikes me, I'm still not convinced that this is the appropriate density. It seems to me, with how I've reviewed this file, and it's extensive, all the characteristics here seem to lend development to the lower range of density, not even at the mid-range as just discussed. So hence why I won't be supporting the recommendation. But I'm very nervous, and I'm very mindful of residents' other concerns. But in particular, though, I think the issue of density is the one that's most compelling to me. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'll just weigh in right now. The density we're looking for, and SWAP really speaks to it, and I'm glad Mr. Thompson identified it, is that there's actually minimum densities within SWAP within the property classifications. That's a really important piece, and I wish that had applied through the entire London plan, but it really only applies in SWAP, and I think it's a good policy. The majority of the issues that are identified through the concerns are issues that are best resolved through site plan. The question of sight lines and screening, shielding from and separation between the developments, questions of how the buildings are set. Those are all site plan questions. And this, I think, given the amount of interest in this file, I think it's quite appropriate to follow Councillor Hopkins' suggestion that an H5 holding provision be placed on the file. But I think the zoning and the density is probably appropriate, especially adjacent to a major road like Colonel Talbot. And so I'm willing to support the application and Councillor Hopkins' suggested amendment of the H5 holding provision.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, so again, comments have been made. I'm a little frustrated when we talk about density, because I often have issues of density that don't get this kind of scrutiny, but that's fine. It's the nature of this committee. I think that this is appropriate. I think that staff have done a lot of work to make sure that it's not over intense. I think the environmental concerns on the site are being addressed, especially with the involvement of Upper Thames Conservation Authority. I think the Southwest Area Plan that's being referred to a lot of times through this, we use acronyms a lot, and I'm sure the community, as communities do, when intensification files come forward, they get very well versed in City Hall and policies, and in planning policies, and in provincial planning policies as well. So, but just in case, Southwest Area Plan is a policy that applies to this area. I remember what then Councillor Joni Beckler used to say to my neighborhood when planning files would come up, and she cautioned us against saying no at all costs without any compromise, because what could come forward in the next planning application could have been the maximum. So in this case, this particular site and how it's currently set aside for development, they could be asking for much more. And under our policies, there would be grounds to consider that. So I'm happy with this, what seems to be a compromise and seems to be a reasoned approach here. I am absolutely supportive of a holding provision, because that gives the community a chance to come forward, because it's the site plan issues that are the big issues with a community. And so having a public site plan meeting will allow the community to come forward and be heard and have their issues considered and actual recommendations made to our site planning staff, so that these concerns are addressed. So I'm looking to committee to see if there are any other comments or questions or concerns. So the motion that's on the floor is the staff recommendation with the added H5 holding provision added there for a public site planning meeting. It's been moved by Councillor Hopkins and seconded by Councillor Turner. And I will call that vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
No.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-1.
So thank you very much, the members of the community, for coming out. I know that these kinds of concerns are difficult. I have them a lot in Ward 5. But another public meeting will give more opportunity to have your voices heard. This brings us to item 3.3, which is an item that was before this committee at our last meeting, and it was referred back to staff to do further consultation. It is removing references to the 1989 official plan from the zoning bylaw Z1. I will look for a motion to open the PPM. Moved by Councillor Kayabaga, seconded by Councillor Turner. I'll call the vote. Councillor Hopkins?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer?
Yes.
Counselor Kaibaga,
Yes.
Counselor Turner,
Yes.
Mayor Holder,
Yes.
and I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Wonderful. So if staff could just give us a 20-second intro, since we did speak about this at the last committee, just to remind members of the public what this is all about.
Thank you. Through the chair. Can you all hear me?
Yes, Mr. Macbeth, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, so as you said, this was presented at the last meeting of PEC on August 10th. And at that time, there were concerns raised by the development industry. So we postponed this now to allow staff time to meet with interested parties and see if we could resolve the concerns. We reached out to several of the London Plan appellants and provided a copy of the August meeting to all of the appellants. The results of discussion with the development industry since August 10th have resulted in some minor changes to the recommended amendments. In staff are in agreement with those changes. They've resulted in some changes recognizing that some of the maps and policies of the London Plan are still under appeal. So for instance, things like neighborhood place type is referred to as neighborhood policies in section 17.1 and 18.1. But again, the categories of changes to the zoning bylaw are the same as they were from the previous report, which is removals of references to the land use designations that were being implemented by the zones, removal of references to section numbers that reference the 89 plan, where the London plans now have been replaced, that policy is in effect, or references to map schedules of the 89 plan, where it was the kind of thing where it was indicating this map or the features on this map are shown on this particular map, because there are policies in both plans also cross-referencing saying this particular map shows you these features. So basically the intention it is to open up flexibility and allow for implementation and development opportunities while the city is working through having two plans, because zoning bylaws their role is to implement an official plan. So by having the two plans that have two different sets of policy directions, the zoning, if explicitly stating this particular zone is for a designation of the 89 plan, in that way would not be contemplating an opportunity to also implement the policy framework and the development and the growth goals of the London Plan as well. The amendment is intended as an interim measure until the comprehensive update to the zoning bylaw is completed through the Rethink Zoning initiative. And staff are of the opinion that the recommended changes, also from August, as well as the changes that have been made since based on those discussions, do not affect the appeals of the London Plan, and the changes resolve the concerns that were identified at the August public meeting. We'd be happy to answer any questions of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Macbeth. Are there any technical questions from the committee? Okay, then I see in committee room 5 that Mr. Wallace is at the microphone, so I'll go to you, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee and Mr. Mayor. First of all, let me say it's Mike Wallace from LDI, and our offices are at 562 Wellington Road here, just up the street here at Suite 203. Let me start with a number of thank yous. First of all, I want to thank you for postponing the last public meeting to today, so that it gave me an opportunity to meet with my our planners and our lawyer and talk about what was actually happening in this report. I want to also thank staff who immediately after the last public meeting contacted us about getting together and having a chat about what was actually involved in this report that had come forward in August. And finally, in terms of thank yous, I want to thank you for incorporating the minor suggestions that we came up with as an industry from LDI to improve the report. The final two comments I'll make are simple. We do really appreciate the communication that we had. I think fundamentally what happened was that the report, like this was a technical report, as staff would tell you, that's making technical changes. And the report in front of it had other issues involved in it. I think in part to try to make sure that the committee members understood what was surrounding these changes in terms of where we were with the London plan and so on. And so some of the comments were probably, let me just put it this way, open to interpretation in the report. And the actual piece that the staff were asking you to approve, we really didn't have any issue with. We just had some wording changes. The final thing I want to say is that, and relating to what Mr. Macbeth had just said, I think the most feedback that I got from our members at LDI was that, is this not like premature? Could we not have done this all together when we do the rethink, the zoning process? It makes them nervous that maybe they're taking little bits and pieces and coming forward. And I assured them that's not really the case here. It actually, and they don't disagree, that it provides more flexibility than with these changes. And we actually agree with staff on that. It's just that they felt that, you know, we've been working on, we started the work before the COVID issue on the rethink zoning, and that possibly that it could all have been wrapped in together instead of what they consider a one-off. But other than that, we want to thank you very much for holding this meeting, or postponing the last one to this one, so we had a chance to review it. Thank you for staff meeting with us, and again, thank you for implementing the very minor changes that we recommend. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Are there, Ms. Bunn, I see you in committee room 5. Is there anybody else that wants to address the committee? Awesome. If they could come forward and state their name, then they have 5 minutes.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Hewitt. I live at 1857 Fanshawe Park Road. Just a few things. Number one, I do not support these changes and oppose them as they affect our property rights. Number two, I did not receive sufficient notice of these changes, especially during COVID times. We received nothing in the mail, even though 3 specific zoning terminology changes affect our property rights and our neighbors' property rights. Specifically section 5.1, section 47.1, and section 48.1. And as far as sending a letter, there's only 10 homes in these rural settlements, so it would have been real easy to send out 10 letters to us all. Number 3, the purpose given for these changes is that it is going to help allow development. These changes will have the exact opposite effect. We require those references to rural settlement as it helps protect our property rights and our neighbors' property rights as we live in an area designated rural settlement. These changes certainly do not provide clarity in our case, which is the second supposed reason for the change. Removing references to the rural settlement do not provide clarity. It makes things very unclear and cloudy. And the third reason given for the changes is to provide flexibility. How does it provide flexibility for a resident of the rural settlement when you remove reference to the rural settlement in the zoning bylaw? It doesn't make any sense. So in conclusion, number 1, again, I oppose these changes. Number 2, I wasn't sufficiently notified. And number 3, these changes are not going to help me and are affecting our zoning rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hewitt. Ms. Bunn, any other? Okay. State your name and you have 5 minutes, sir.
Yeah, hi, I'm Robert Hewitt. I'm her husband. And if you look at section 47.1, where the changes are going in, where they're going to remove the reference to the rural settlement designation and references to the policies in the sections there, it actually, those are the things that prove our rights to have that ability to develop those lands that way. There's really, when you think of what my wife mentioned earlier about clarity, or that this is going to help for development or anything, there's been no explanation as to how that helps for anything in the rural settlement. What is the specific issue of why this change is being done in the rural settlement commercial zone, and also with reference to the other section where they're changing it at is this one section is 0.51, referring to R1-14, R1-15, and R1-16 zone variations and how they applied in rural settlement designations. To remove that from the zoning actually makes things hard. We found when the city annexed the area, we had Greg Barrett, we dealt a lot with Greg and with our zoning. And we had the whole community come down and get certain zoning rights put into our properties. And since then, we've had nothing but trouble with when we come to the city later, the residents in that area that want to do this or want to do that, they don't recognize any of the things that were done. They don't, if the terminology isn't there, they broaden it out in a way that you can't fit into the box anymore. For example, the London plan talks about supporting infill housing in the rural settlements. The old plan talked about supporting infill housing in the rural settlements. We currently have put forth a plan to have some infill housing on our property, and the city's not supporting it at all. So even when it's in the London plan, even when it's in the old plan, we still don't win. So any changes to any references to any sort of zoning rate that we have in that area, we strongly oppose, because we are not even getting the zoning rights that we currently have. So currently we're zoned R-14 in the rural settlement, which has specific lot sizes. The city agrees that we meet the lot sizes. The city says the London plan supports infill housing. The old plan supported infill housing, but of course they're not going to approve it in any way. So our whole rural settlement in our area actually has about 40 acres of land that's completely undeveloped. It's right up, butts right up to the sewers and the water lines at the COP subdivision. We have traffic that's crazy there, but we have 40 acres of land that's got maybe 10 houses on it. It's totally unutilized. It's not agricultural land, it's not farms, but because it's set outside that urban growth boundary, we keep, all these different things keep holding us back in that territory from having any sort of rights. We don't have sidewalks, we don't have high-speed internet, we don't have street lights, we have an 80 kilometer mile speed limit that goes past us, that's dangerous, but we keep getting pigeonholed, and no one's looking at our exact experience that we have there. I've sent emails, I've been fighting with the city, I don't know how long. I had to fight to get the rights in the first place because they were actually going to zone us in the farms originally. So you're going to have a 2-acre farm or a 4-acre farm on Fanshawe Road right by Cops Lumber. So when we see changes happening again in a very specific, small way, there's got to be a reason behind this change. And the reasons that are given for these changes don't match anything of our history. And what development are they referring to that they're going to make it easier for in the rural settlement? There's been no consultation with us in any way, shape, or form. I'm perfectly willing to meet with Greg Barrett, as I originally dealt with him in the first place, and the community's willing to meet with him as well if he wants to explain these things, but we just don't understand why they would be changing these.
So you're coming up on your 5 minutes, sir.
Okay, that's the best I can do in 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. So I do just want to mention that the official plan of the City of London is in transition. So the London plan will be the new official plan of the City of London. And it has been approved by council and by the ministry. So I'll just go to Ms. Bunn to see if there is anybody else that would like to address this committee. No. So with no other members of the public, I will look to committee to close the public participation meeting. Moved by Councillor Kayabagha, seconded by Councillor Turner. And I'll call that question. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Counselor Hopkins,
Yes.
Counselor Kayabaga,
Yes.
Counselor Turner,
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
I just want to remind members of the public that under the municipal bylaw and under the instruction from the medical officer of health for Middlesex London Health Unit, we have to, those of us who are in a public place, which is City Hall, we must keep our masks on while we are in the public place. That is the bylaw and that is the instruction that we received from the medical officer of health. So just a reminder of that. Before I go to committee, I'm going to ask Mr. McKay to comment on some of the issues that were raised. Then I'll go to you, Councillor Kayabaga, after I hear from Mr. Macbeth. Sorry.
Thank you. Through the chair. The R1 zone designation identifies that it's typically on lands designated low-density residential and rural settlement in the official plan. As I noted, that one of the three reasons for this as a citywide change is that rural settlement, that designation has now been replaced by the rural neighborhoods policies of the London Plan, which are enforced in effect. So the character of the area has a new name, but the designation is no longer something from the 1989 official plan. So that's the intention of the flexibility, is recognizing that some of the terminology and some of the designations no longer exist in the policies that are now enforced in effect in the London plan. I'd also add that for the other one, which was section, it was about the secondary dwelling units. Within the London plan, the actual permitted uses within rural settlements is policy 1242, and it recognizes secondary dwelling units as a permitted use within the rural neighborhoods place type. Again, this is, as Mr. Wallace had noted, we as staff saw this as a technical amendment, in as much as it was deleting and in some instances replacing language rather than actually changing any permissions within the official plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Macbeth. So, so again, yes, I was. Thank you for clarifying that. So the wording changing is happening because the policy is already in effect, and these are the policies of the London Plan that are in effect. So we need to make our zoning bylaw refer to the actual official plan that's in effect. It would, rather than be referring it to a non-existent official plan, basically. So perhaps, Mr. Macbeth, Mr. Hewitt mentioned that he had been in contact with Mr. Barrett in the past. Perhaps Mr. Hewitt could contact you or contact Mr. Barrett, whichever is more appropriate, via email, and he could list his and Ms. Hewitt's specific concerns, and that could be addressed that way, so that there is a better understanding of what actually has taken place. It's, for the most part, seems like a change in terminology and not necessarily a change in land rights. Mr. Hewitt, perhaps Ms. Bunn could help you how to contact Mr. Barrett or Mr. Macbeth, so that you can have your specific concerns, and Ms. Hewitt as well, so you can have your specific concerns addressed. With that, I'll go to Councillor Kayabaga.
I think through you, Madam Chair, I just wanted to have staff address some of the concerns that Mr. Hewitt brought forward. And I think him connecting to staff members is the right course of moving forward. But I was curious to know if anybody could address the concerns that he brought forward, and especially with him mentioning that his area of habitation does not have street lighting, and all the concerns that he has. I just wanted to know if staff could comment on that and if they would be willing to assist Mr. Hewitt.
Through the
Okay.
chair, this is Justin Adama. If I may just address that, we're more than happy to meet with Mr. Hewitt and explain the full impact of the recommended amendment. If I could, one other concern that I heard that I just wanted to address was that the potential loss of land rights. And I just wanted to clarify that the recommended amendment applies only to the preamble or general purpose portion of each zone that's affected by this. So there's no changes to the maps where the actual zones apply, and there's no changes to any permitted use or regulations. So, and I'm not familiar with the Hewitt specific situation or properties, but whatever zoning has been applied or is currently applied is not affected by this. The only changes that are being made within the zoning bylaw are to those preamble portions that apply or give a general explanation of where the zones are intended to apply, and removing references to the 1989 official plan doesn't change where they apply on the actual map. That the maps still apply and are not being changed through this process.
Thank you, Mr. Adama. Any other comments or questions from committee? Not seeing any, so I'll look for a motion. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. I'll call the vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabага.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thanks very much to staff, and thank you to the members of the public who came out and spoke on this matter. That takes us to items for direction. And item 4.1 is the 5th report of the London Advisory Committee on Heritage. I don't know if there is any comments that staff would like to make on this, or any questions or comments from committee on this. I'll see. I'm seeing none. So I'm looking for a mover to receive this report. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by the mayor. I'll call that vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabага.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
That brings us to the final, the deferred matters list. We have to receive that as well. Are there any comments or questions on the deferred matters list? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. There's an item that's flagged related to a discussion we had earlier about inclusionary zoning, and the suggestion is that since we've had some update reports about inclusionary zoning, that we could drop this deferred matter because it's complete. And I think based on how that discussion went earlier, it might be better to keep it on the deferred matters list so we keep our eye on it until we in fact have inclusionary zoning in the City of London. So I'd approve the changes with the exception of that one. I think we should leave it on until we get it actually wrapped up.
Okay, clerks will make the change to that. So it will stay on the deferred matters list as requested by the Deputy Mayor. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Turner.
Thank you. I thank the Deputy Mayor for bringing that up, because it was one that I'd noticed as we were having that discussion too. I'm curious what the rationale for recommendation for removal was, though, if I might, through you, Madam Chair.
I'll go to staff for that.
Through the chair, the rationale was simply that it appears on our work plan and will be brought forward in 2021, as I mentioned during the earlier item. That said, I have no issue or concern with leaving it on for future or reference.
Thank you, Mr. Adama. So with that, I'll look for a motion to receive the deferred matters list as revised. Moved by the mayor, seconded by Councillor Kayabага, and I'll call that vote. Deputy Mayor Helmer,
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins, yes. Councillor Kayabага,
Yes.
Councillor Turner,
Yes.
Mayor Holder,
Yes.
and I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
There is no other business, so that takes us to the confidential matter that is listed on the public agenda, and I will look for a motion to go in camera. Moved by Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. I can do a show of hands on that. All those in favor of this motion, raise your hand. I see none opposed, and that motion carries. Oh, but the clerk, I think, will report out. Motion carries.